Well, modelers, it was bound to happen, and it appears that my good luck with airplanes has finally run out. So let's talk about the Piper Tri-Pacer from Nexa, sold by Motion RC. I don't generally enjoy making videos like this, but I've always said on this channel, since I am not sponsored by anybody, I tell it to you like it is. If a plane is great, I say it's great. If it's bad, I say it's bad. And this plane has some serious issues. But before we get into that, let's start with the good. First off, just look at it. This plane is gorgeous. It's a very unique Piper Tri-Pacer, which you don't see it very often, and it has those beautiful golden age of aviation lines. Absolutely love the way this plane looks. Second thing about this plane that I absolutely love is the way it flies. I just mained it yesterday, and my goodness does this plane fly great. It will slow down and just fly scale if you want, or you can kick up the control throws and really start ripping it and put it through its paces. Unfortunately, that's where the good ends. Everything else goes bad. So let's start with that. First off, this plane cost $280 for the ARF. So it is in a pretty premium price point. And for $280, there's a certain level of quality that you're expecting, and this plane just won't live up to that. So I'm going to start at the front and go all the way to the back with the issues that I ran into. First off is the motor mount. This plane is designed to be either nitro or gas or electric. And so what they do for the electric motor is they give you a separate plywood motor mount that is then held to the main motor mount with 4 bolts. Very typical setup. Works pretty good. Not my favorite, but it works. The problem is they just grabbed bolts off the shelves and gave them to you, and the bolts they give you are too wide and too long to fit under this cowl. So you have to just throw them out and get new bolts. It doesn't make any sense. Also, if you use the bolts they give you, the back ends are so thick that you literally cannot put the battery hatch back on the airplane. And that is a theme that I will keep coming back to, is it seems like they just grabbed stuff off the shelf and threw it in here, and nobody actually assembled this airplane to see if it worked. So that takes us to the nose gear, which is very typical. It's a metal rod that goes up through a plastic holder, and you have the steering arm that's held on by an Allen screw. Works very well. In this case, I went to screw on the Allen screw, got it tight, and it just stripped right out. So I had to drill and tap it out to a 4mm bolt instead of the 3 that came with it. And you gotta remember, this is a 6-pound airplane, and it just, very little effort, it just stripped out. That's just cheap hardware. You can't do that. And speaking of the nose gear, the hole in the steering arm was way too big for the control rod that comes up from the rudder servo, and so it was sloppy. So I had to drill a new hole that was much smaller, about half the size of the one that was in there, so that the nose gear didn't rattle back and forth. Alright, continuing to move back, we come to a very nice scale touch they give you, is this magnetically latched door in the side of the fuselage, just like the real one. It's great. The only problem is, I don't think they ever actually tried to open it, because with the wing on, you can open it about that far before it runs into the bottom of the wing. If anybody had put this plane together, they would have seen that it's too tall and shortened it by 3 to 5 millimeters, and you could actually open the door, making it usable. And that brings us to the wings. The way these wings are held on is something I haven't seen in probably 20 years. Instead of having any kind of a normal wing mounting bolt, what you're supposed to do in this plane is there's an aluminum wing spar that goes through, and there are holes drilled in the top of the wing. You are supposed to drill down into the aluminum spar, and it's just held on with screws, which you can see here. Totally ruins the scale lines, and it's just a terrible way of attaching a wing, especially when you have this really nice battery hatch. You can fit your whole hand in here. There is no reason to not have thumb screws that you can just screw on, holding the wings in place. It just, again, the stuff they did in this plane doesn't make any sense. And continuing with the wings, they have these very nice wing struts, right? And you think, God, those are a nice scale touch, looks really good. When you come to the manual for the step to install them, you'll notice a slight problem. This is how it comes, it's upside down, right? When you flip it so it's right side up, probably won't take you long to notice that this is not this airplane. This is a Cub, which is a tail dragger. So the landing gear is way further forward. When you go to mount these struts, there's a blind nut in the fuselage. But if you follow the manual, it lines up with where the gear is. So it would actually be attaching way back here instead of where it actually is, where the blind nut is. It's just crazy. For a plane that costs almost $300, they don't even use the right picture in the manual. Another very nice scale touch that they did on this plane is there is a seat, a removable seat inside the cockpit. and it's just held down with a magnet. And you think, nice touch, right? Except here's the problem. The seat is only held down by a magnet with a crossbeam. The rudder servo sits behind it. It has one rod that goes back and one rod that goes forward for the steering servo. The problem is the seat goes right on top of that control rod for the steering servo, so you can't actually fit the seat back in when you have a control rod to the front landing gear. So you have a choice. Do you want to be able to steer your plane, or do you want to have the nice scale seat? And the thing that was so disappointing is, like most of the stuff on this plane, it's so easy to fix. All I had to do was cut that crossbeam off and put a vertical piece of wood on there. And now the seat fits in and out just like it should. It's just another example of it seeming like somebody never put this plane together, because there's no way you could have put this plane together the way it's intended and had it work. Continuing our way back, we get to the main landing gear, which have these nice fairings on it, right? They look great. Nice scale touch. Too bad they're made out of cheap plastic. Just like the wheel pants. Again, $280, and they don't give you fiberglass wheel pants. But worse than that, the holes in the wheel pants are so small that the cheap foam wheels they give you can't actually fit into the fairings. So you have to cut out the holes, and since it's cheap plastic, the paint flakes like crazy as soon as you start cutting out that hole. I just can't believe they didn't give you fiberglass wheel pants on a plane that costs almost $300. Which leads us to the hardware on this plane. So you would expect for the control horns on a plane like this, you would get your typical nylon ones that have a backing plate that have bolts that go through the control surfaces. That is not what you get on this plane. First of all, they're super thin. They're about half the thickness of these ones right here. And they're the cheap plastic ones that have just a piece of plastic that goes up through the control surface, and then there's a plastic holder that snaps down on top. There's no bolt. It's just held on by little tiny pieces of plastic. This plane weighs 6 pounds without a battery, and that's what they give you for your control horns. Worse than that, you can't even replace them with normal ones because they don't have hardwood blocks on all the control surfaces, so you're stuck using the crap that they gave you. On the other end at your servo, you would expect these, right? Typical ARF ones, where your control rod comes through, you make a 90-degree bend through the servo arm, and this holds it on and snaps in place, right? That's what you would expect. Instead, with this plane, what you get are these cheap little metal ones. You've all seen these if you've done a park flyer. They're the ones that bolt through your servo arm, and the control rod goes through the hole, and it's held down with an Allen key. You expect this on a $100 park flyer, not a $280 6-pound all-wooden airplane. This is just not strong enough for this airplane. So I had to throw all of these out and replace them with normal ones. And that leads us to the instruction manual. The instruction manual for this airplane is really not good. A lot of the hardware doesn't match with what you actually get with the kit. It's really hard to follow. The pictures are not great. But also, when you get to the section about setting up your airplane with the control throws, they only give you one set of control throws, no lows and highs. These are your lows. The plane flies very lethargic in scale with the control throws in here. I typically fly it with double the rates that you see in the manual. On top of that, they do not give you any numbers for an elevator to flap mixing. So just be aware you are going to need to mix in some down elevator when you kick in your flaps on this plane. And that leads us lastly to the covering. Now they have this nice scale design, but it would have been difficult to do in Monocoat or Orocover. So instead they did that cheap stick-on covering that you can't shrink. So when this plane gets in the sun, it gets all wrinkly, and then when you bring it home, it gets nice and smooth again. But you can't take a heat gun and shrink it down properly like it should be. Anytime I see a plane with covering like this, it really makes me sad, because this stuff is just, you can already feel it's loose, and there's no way to tighten it up. So like I said before, really the only saving grace of this plane is that it does fly extraordinarily well, and it looks great. But if anybody was to ask me if they should buy this, I would say absolutely not. For $280, it is a waste of money. And here's the thing. It would have cost Motion maybe another $20 to fix all of the issues in this plane and make it an outstanding aircraft. And I just don't understand why they went cheap, because when I'm spending $280, I'll easily step up to $300 for much better hardware. But looking around the marketplace, at that price point, I expect a much higher level of quality than what I get with this airplane. Look at the last R5 built, the Edge 540 from Tower Hobbies. I'll put a link down in the description below. It's almost the same size as this plane, and it costs $190. That's $90 less than this airplane, and the hardware that came with that is far superior in quality to this airplane. So how can I recommend $280 for this plane when somebody could spend almost $100 less and get a superior aircraft from Tower Hobbies? It just doesn't work. So Motion, seriously, you gotta fix this. Either fix the plane and charge a little bit more, or you need to lower the price, because at this price point, I would tell anybody out there if they asked me, do not buy this plane. It doesn't matter how good it flies, because the hardware is so cheap, something is gonna break at some point and it's gonna crash. And that's all I got for this disappointing Piper Tri-Pacer by Nexa, sold by Motion RC. I'll see you guys next time.